All right, this is section 8.9 in the textbook. It's called the quadratic formula. This is now our third method for how to solve a quadratic equation. We've done the factoring method, we've done the square root method, and now we're doing the quadratic formula. This is method 3. There are 5 methods altogether. We are skipping the completing the square method. Most of you will learn about it in Algebra 2. They'll cover it at that point. And the 5th method is the graphing method. That's the one we're going to be doing next in our probably starting in the beginning of May. So this is the quadratic formula. The formula is written right here. All right, x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, the whole entire thing divided by 2a. Make sure that fraction bar is for the whole entire thing, not just the radical part or just the negative b part. It's the whole thing. So I would make sure that you copy it correctly, bold it, highlight it, star it at the top of your notebook paper because you're going to use it for all the examples we're doing today plus the homework. And you don't want to be doing the formula wrong, because if you're doing the formula wrong, you basically cannot get anything right. Typically, this is something that we have you memorize. And so we're not doing that this year because of the online learning. But I wanted to show you this little song of this little girl. I don't know her. She's just on YouTube. She's 3 years old, and she knows the quadratic formula. So if she can memorize it, so can you.
I wonder what you are. That's good.
Good job, Emily. What about the x equals?
X equals negative b.
Uh-huh.
X equals negative b plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4ac over 2.
So if she can do it, so can you. All right, so make sure you know this formula. In red here, an important thing to know, the equation must equal 0 to use the quadratic formula. It must equal 0. This is the same rule that we had when we did the factoring method. In order to do factoring method, it had to equal 0. So this is our setup over here. You would want in standard form, you would want your x squared term first, then your x term, then your c, then your equals 0. Make sure that you have it in standard form just like that. And it's okay if a term is missing here. It's okay if there's no x term, okay? It's okay if there is no constant. You can still do the quadratic formula. The only thing you have to have in order to do quadratic formula is you have to have the quadratic part of it, which is the x squared. As long as you have an x squared, you can do quadratic formula. So you could have done quadratic formula for anything we've done so far for factoring method and anything we've done so far for square root method. Quadratic formula would have worked. So why didn't we use it all that time? Because it's a pretty big formula and it's a lot of work. All right, so here we go. We're going to have 6 examples today. Make sure you're taking notes because you're going to upload a picture of your notes for me. And also, make sure you have a calculator handy. So if you don't have one, pause and go get one. All right, so here we go. The first thing you're going to do for every problem is you're going to rewrite it so that it's in standard form and so that it equals 0. So I'm going to add 1 to both sides so that this equals 0. Okay, because that would cancel out. Now, helpful suggestion is write down your a, b, and c values. So my a value is the number that's in front of the x squared, which is this 2. So my a value is 2. My b value is the number that's in front of the x, right, which is negative 8. Make sure you get that negative sign. And then the c value is the constant. So the constant is 1. If by accident you forgot to do that first step of rewriting it, you would have thought the constant was negative 1, which is going to drastically change your answer. So that's why we need to make sure it equals 0 first before we begin anything. So I'm going to use these a, b, and c values and substitute them into the formula. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. You do not have to write the formula every time. I was just writing it this time so that we can reference it. All right, so let's start plugging stuff in. So negative b. Negative b, think of this as the opposite of b. So whatever your b value is, my b value is negative 8. Negative b just means do the opposite of that. So if my b value is negative 8, I'm going to change that highlighted negative b into a positive 8. So always do the opposite. If my b value had been 8, I would have put a negative 8. I'm going to bring down that plus or minus sign. I'm going to put a gigantic square root. Here's another place you have to be careful. B squared. When you do b squared, I'm putting negative 8 squared. You need to write it with the negative 8 in parentheses, because negative 8 in parentheses with the squared, that gets you 64. If you forget the parentheses, it's negative 64. Two different answers. So always put parentheses around your b, okay? If you want to, a suggestion, when you write your formula at the top of your paper, you might want to put parentheses around the b. This way you always remember to do that. Okay, I'm going to bring down the minus 4. I'm going to change the a in the formula to a 2, because that's what I have off to the side there. I'm going to use parentheses for multiplication. And then I'm going to change the c in the formula into a 1, because that's what I have over there to the left side. Divided by, in the denominator, I have a 2 times my a value. My a value is 2. So x equals all of that. Okay, so now we're going to start simplifying. So x equals, I'm going to keep the 8 the same, plus or minus. I'm going to do another radical. For right now, I'm just going to do the negative 8 squared. Negative 8 squared is 64. And then I'm going to do these three things. Negative 4 times 2 times 1. There's a lot of different ways to think about this part, the negative 4. You can think of it as subtraction. I recommend just doing negative 4 times 2 times 1. Negative 4 times 2 times 1. So negative 4 times 2 times 1, that gets us negative 8. So I'm going to write minus 8. If it had gotten us a positive 8, I would have written 64 plus 8. Divided by, on the bottom, 2 times 2 is 4. Okay, so now I'm going to simplify that radical. 64 minus 8 is 56. So 8 plus or minus the square root of 56, all divided by 4. Okay, then what you're going to want to do is we need to simplify this radical. The square root of 56 is not a perfect square, so we need to break it down. This is what you did in the last chapter. So think of two numbers that multiply to make 56, but one of them has to be a perfect square. So that would be 4 times 14. The square root of 4 is a perfect square. That becomes a 2. So this whole radical becomes 2 root 14. Okay, so I'm actually going to hop up here. I'm going to rewrite what I have. X equals 8 plus or minus. That square root of 56 became a 2 root 14 divided by, my denominator is a 4. Okay, we have one last step to do. That last step is you can simplify and divide the 4 only if all the outside numbers are divisible by a same thing. So if all these 3 green things are all divisible by something, you can divide all 3 of those green numbers by something, not the radical, okay? So it always has to be these 3 green spots. So what are these 3 green spots all divisible by? They're all divisible by 2. So I'm going to divide all of those green things by 2. So this would become 4 plus or minus. This one would become a 1, but I'm not going to write 1. It's going to disappear and become invisible. Divided by, and then on the bottom here, 4 divided by 2 is 2. This is then my final answer. Notice that I cannot Cannot divide this 4 in 2. And the reason I can't do that is because of the invisible 1 that is there, and you can't divide all 3 spots by the same thing, okay? So you can only divide if these 3 numbers that are highlighted, including that invisible 1, are all divisible by whatever you want to simplify. Okay, that's the trickiest part, I think, at the end. Okay, and that's your final answer. All right, let's try another one. All right, so if you want to pause and just get the formula set up, go ahead and do that. I'm going to move that 12 over to the other side. There's actually a little bit of a twist to this question. Did you notice something about this problem? All the numbers are divisible by 3. So what I can do, because it's in an equation, I can divide both sides of the equation by 3. You're allowed to do that. Just like you're allowed to subtract 12 from both sides, or add 2 to both sides, or divide both sides by 3, right? So you're allowed to do this. So I'm going to divide every single thing by 3. So x squared minus 2x minus 4 equals 0 divided by 3 is 0. So now I'm going to write down my a value is the invisible 1, that's here. My b value is negative 2. My c value is negative 4. Okay, so here we go with the formula. X equals negative b, means opposite of b, so I'm going to put a positive 2, plus or minus the square root of my b value squared in parentheses, minus 4 times the a value times the c value. All of that divided by 2 times my a value. So check to see if your substitution is right. So now we're going to do x equals, okay, I'm going to simplify this negative 2 squared into a 4. And then I'm going to multiply negative 4 times 1 times negative 4. That gets me positive 16. Oops. Divided by, on the denominator there, right, 2 times 1 is 2. I'm going to add the numbers together in my radical, and then divide by 2, okay? I cannot divide the 2 2's. I cannot divide just that, because you also have to divide with whatever's there. Think of like this green V here. You have to do it to all 3. So I'm not going to do that. But what I can do is I can simplify the square root of 20. Square root of 20 can become root 4 and root 5, which becomes 2 root 5 divided by 2. And now I can divide all those 3 numbers. They're all divisible by 2. So it becomes 1 plus or minus 1 square root of 5 divided by 1. So I'm going to choose to make some of those 1's invisible, and this is my final answer. Now, some of you might be asking, how much work do I actually have to show? Like, what's mandatory? Let's see. Mandatory, I would say, is this step right here, right? And then I would choose either one of these 2 next steps, right? So either show the substitution on this first step here, or show the substitution on this one here. Pick one, right? Pick one of those to show. I would then say these last 3 steps are all required, right? You need all of them. Right? You need to prove to me that you simplified the radical, and then do the division. So you really can only eliminate 1 step from all this work. All right, here we go. Next. All right, so we'll subtract the 6 from both sides. Okay, now that we've done a few, we're going to go a little bit faster here. You can pause the video and go ahead and try. Here's my a, b, and c values. So x equals negative b, which means opposite of b, plus or minus the square root of Okay, I'm showing all the work here. And just keep pausing and checking, make sure that you're doing things right. So negative 4 times 2 times negative 5 is positive 40. Okay, now square root of 49. This is a special problem. The square root of 49 is a perfect square, so you don't have to break it down. What's the square root of 49? 7. So we're going to put this as our next step. Notice there's no radicals anymore. Now, we did something similar, like a problem similar to this in the square root section. Once you get to this point, you need to break apart into two separate equations. I'm going to break apart this way. So one equation is going to be negative 3 plus 7 divided by 4. And the other equation will be negative 3 minus 7 divided by 4. I'm just one time doing plus and one time doing minus. So this would become 4 on the top divided by 4. So x equals 1 is one of my answers. And then on the bottom, I have negative 10 divided by 4. So x equals negative 5 halves is my other answer. So two answers, x equals 1 and x equals negative 5 halves. That was example 3. All right, example 4. This one's already set equal to 0. So we can just go straight to our a value, b value, c value. I would recommend pausing, going ahead and trying to get as far as you can. Negative b, eight squared is 64. Negative 4 times 1 times 16 is negative 64. Divided by 2 times 1 is 2. So if you notice what happens here, we get the square root of 0. What's the square root of 0? The square root of 0 is just 0. So this kind of looks like the problem we just did, where there's no more radical and we could break apart into two separate questions. X equals negative 8 plus 0 divided by 2. X equals negative 8 minus 0 divided by 2. But as you're about to see, this is kind of silly. Negative 8 divided by 2 is negative 4. And down on the bottom, negative 8 divided by 2 is also negative 4. So this is kind of a waste of work here, because adding 0 and subtracting 0, kind of the same thing. So when this happens, what you can do, like either on paper or in your head, is kind of just ignore this part. And so your final answer is just x equals negative 8 divided by 2, right? You just do that. And so your answer is negative 4. And so that eliminates having to do all this work. If you do all of this work on the right-hand side, don't write x equals negative 4, x equals negative 4 2 times. Just write it once, okay? So this problem only has one solution. That can happen, right? We typically get two solutions for quadratics, but here's an example where we only get one solution because it's the same answer 2 times. We don't say it twice. All right, we've got example 5 and 6, and then we're done. And these are special, so make sure you don't skip them here. Some little special things happen. Okay, in number 5. Actually, do we need number 6? No, I don't think we're going to need number 6. I think we'll get rid of it or make it optional if you want to try it. Okay, so number 5. It's already set equal to 0. There's nothing everything is divisible by, right? There's no common factor here. So go straight to our a, b, and c values. Okay, so x equals negative b, which would be 2. B squared minus 4 times my a times my c, all divided by 2 times 3. Also notice that showing work really nice and neatly here. Everything is lining up. Can follow the steps. Each time I'm putting x equals, that kind of starts a new step for us. Okay, so what happens here is that the number that's underneath the radical sign becomes negative 20. And we've talked about this with the square root method, that you can't have a negative number underneath the radical sign. That's a big, big uh-oh. Like if you try to do the square root of negative 20 on your calculator, it's going to say something like domain error, okay? So we are not allowed to do the square root of a negative. So when this happens, automatically you just stop your work, and we say no real solution. All right, and there's no real solution that could make this equation true. So there are 3 different scenarios that can happen. Let's revisit them. On numbers 1, 2, and 3, we got 2 answers every time. This is 2 answers right here. It's just written as 1. It's 4 plus root 14 divided by 2. It's also 4 minus root 14 divided by 2. 2 answers. On number 2, down to the bottom, we got 2 answers. 1 plus root 5, 1 minus root 5. Here we got 2 answers. On number 4, we only got 1 solution. And that 1 solution happened because we ended up with a 0 under the radical. And when we get a negative number under the radical, then there's no real solution. Okay, we're going to talk about this in more detail on Thursday. So here's number 6, if you want to pause the video and try it. I'm not going to go through it. I'll just write the answer down in a second. And then on Google Classroom, these problems are posted for you guys to do for homework. Notice that number 2, that it doesn't equal 0. All the rest of them do. Also, one of these questions, you can do something similar to what we did in number 2 to make your life easier. It's all divisible by something. So that will make the numbers smaller in the problem for you. One of these is like that. All right, so if you want to pause and try number 6, totally optional. So when I say upload a picture of your homework, of your class notes, you don't have to have number 6 there. But if you want to try it, go ahead, pause, and I'll write down the final answer. So this would be the final answer for this question. If you need help with it, you know where to find me. All right, guys, thank you.